So Desiree shared a quick little tidbit with me that she's been trying to get Elizabeth to go running with her. So I think that's why this item is called the Lightning Marathon. So please welcome CEO of Lightning Labs, Elizabeth Stark, and Lightning investor, Jim Patterson.
Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, so Desiree, who's been one of our awesome MCs, has started the Lightning Running Club. I believe there's also a Bitcoin Running Club, and the problem is I can never be awake enough at 7 a.m. to go running with the team. So at Lightning Labs, we're on hacker standard time, I'd say. We tend to be a later crowd. But yeah, this is awesome. Thanks so much. Earlier this year, actually, I sent some messages to some of the Lightning protocol developers and saying that, hey, it's time that we get everybody together, right? There have been these amazing Lightning Hack Days that Jeff had instigated. I remember being with Thomas, Jeff, and others at Room 77 quite a while back, talking about a Lightning Hack Day. That was the day also Lalu bought the first ever beer with testnet Bitcoin. Yeah. History in the making in Berlin back there. And to see 500 people in this room, by the way, we planned for 400, and turned out we got more than we expected. So clearly Lightning is super popular.
Yeah, cool. Lightning Marathon. So Elizabeth, you've been running the marathon quite a while now. So yeah, I'd love your thoughts on kind of where do you think we are, what mile marker are we on, and how do you think kind of the rest of the road looks ahead of us?
Yeah, so it's been 4 years now. It's crazy. 4 years since I started getting involved in this whole thing. Even before Lightning was a thing, getting interested in payment channels, networks, what could be done with Bitcoin script, Bitcoin contracts. And honestly, it's been a wild ride, right? But if you look back to the early days of the internet, right, 1969, you had the creation of ARPANET. And then it wasn't until the early 90s that you had Tim Berners-Lee and the World Wide Web. So there's actually this class of trolls on Twitter that loves to troll me. And they love to say this thing about 18 months, where supposedly Lightning's supposed to be ready in 18 months. At one point, I may have commented like a beta was going to be out. And we actually did ship, by the way. But they love to troll me about 18 months. And here, my philosophy is, well, we're really in the beginning of this marathon. And by the way, most Lightning development of C Lightning, Eclair, LND started in late 2015, early 2016. So, testnet came in 2017, beta in 2018. Like, I think that's pretty damn good, right? Like, we don't have that many developers working on this. But at the end of the day, we're in the early days, right? And it's not going to be perfect. We've heard about a lot of the challenges. Also, oh yeah, the trolls love to talk about like how Lightning will never work. And I think as a community, we're very honest about our challenges. We saw so many talks about, Carla gave a great talk about Lightning FUD and exchanges. Will was talking about usability and all the challenges that are there. And we know about them. And if anything, I think they're exciting problems to solve. And it's going to take time. Like, it's not, Rome was not built in a day. And this is not going to happen overnight. And frankly, I'm really excited about all the challenges to come. It's certainly a lot of hard work. This conference, many of us, special shout out to Jeff, Louisa, Desiree, and all the FOMO folks. I think they haven't really been sleeping for him. But to make this all happen, it's just going to be a lot of hard work. Yeah. So congrats, everybody.
Yeah, I think when, especially when I look at a lot of the talks on this conference, a lot of those challenges seem to be around things like, liquidity, channel management. So, and a lot of that has to be solved somewhat at the protocol level before the developers can really start implementing, better user experiences. So in terms of kind of the next couple years, how do you think things are going to evolve, and what kind of things are you guys focused on at Lightning Labs in those areas?
Yeah, so when we've had the betas come out of the various implementations, there weren't really any solutions around liquidity yet. And I was at a meetup the other night, and somebody actually said to me, works at a fund, and said, oh, I was chatting with somebody from my fund, and they said, they don't think Lightning will ever work because you can't solve liquidity. And I laughed. And I said, well, that's kind of like saying to people in the financial world, you'll never have a financial system because you can't solve liquidity. It turns out people are like making trillions of dollars a year around issues of liquidity. So I think similarly in the Lightning realm, things have progressed like quite a bit in terms of, if you think about early to mid 2018 as the initial mainnet betas. We've seen so many liquidity solutions emerge. We heard about the Thor API. We'll hear about Lightning Loop tomorrow when Alex Bosworth talks about that. We heard about Lisa's proposal. So I actually think we've seen a lot of evolution in terms of solutions for liquidity. On the flip side, as I said, this is evolving, right? It turns out this is an opportunity for people, that want to commit capital to the network to be able to monetize their capital, and providing liquidity is going to be a key portion of this. So one thing I like to say is not all capital on Lightning is equal. You could have a node that doesn't actually have good channels and good connections, and that's not going to be equivalent to a node that has, good connectivity, good channel management, that's able to balance and manage their channels. So for example, we saw some parties, that they may be even here in the room, that deployed a lot of capital onto the network. They won't remain nameless, but many people know who that is. And it turned out that just opening lots of channels, max channel size, was not really the most effective way to deploy capital onto the network, because now you actually don't have well-connected channels. They're actually unidirectional. They're going in one direction. So if you want to flow through other nodes, that's not actually going to be efficient and effective in terms of liquidity. And then you have somebody like, Alex Bosworth, who I know is here in the room, running a lot of nodes with yells.org. Alex actually charges higher fees on the network. We'll get to fees in a second. And he hadn't deployed nearly as much capital, but was actually earning a return and able to allocate that capital efficiently. So Alex has done a lot of work in terms of node scoring. We call it the BOS score at Lightning Labs and Autopilot. So to me, one of the key themes is, not only is not all capital on the network equal, but enabling the efficient allocation of capital on the network, I think, is a key theme, and something that we're going to see, progressing and moving forward. We've already seen a lot of products that are starting to enable that, and that'll only emerge even more so over the next, couple of years. So for the person that said liquidity will not be solved, by the way, I talk to a lot of people in the financial world as well. I'm a tech person. I am not from finance, so I kind of get to be like, hi, I'm from the internet, and I'm explaining Bitcoin to you. And when I start to talk to them about these financial products and things like liquidity, they get really excited. Their eyes light up because they see the parallels to their industry, and they also see opportunities. So if anything, Lightning in and of itself, it's an open source protocol, but it's also a new type of financial market, and we'll see new assets and new ways of kind of commoditizing liquidity emerge on this network.
Yeah, I think, to your point, I think when you look at some of the talks here and you see, Jack Mallers gave a talk about, fee derivatives.
By the way, that was an awesome talk,
yes.
Jack, and it was not weird. It was really cool.
So, yeah. So now you're talking about derivative products being created. When you think about putting liquidity on the Lightning Network to get a fixed return, right? That looks a lot like fixed income. So when you think about the fact that eventually these Lightning node operators are going to have to professionalize, which assumes they're going to be compensated for it, that means fees must go up. And I think that doesn't seem somewhat controversial. It seems obvious. But what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, so who here is on the Lightning dev mailing list? Show of hands. Cool, well, if you're not on it, definitely go sign up. Anybody can sign up for it. There was a really interesting discussion recently around fees and around the network, and Rusty, I don't know if you're in the room, Rusty proposed a fee increase. And yeah, there was debate, which, by the way, I love the Bitcoin community. There's always going to be debate. And I think, my take, and was talking to Lalo, and Lalo posted a response, was, I believe we will see this fee market emerge, but I think it'll emerge more naturally. It hasn't happened yet. The question is, do we want to seem like some degree of planning from the developer side to increase fees, increase the defaults? My take is, no, it's better to let the market itself emerge. But at the end of the day, right now, people that are, running nodes are, how many people here are running nodes? Awesome. A lot of them are hobbyists and they're volunteers, and they're, you're not necessarily thinking of what is the power cost of running my node, and are you calculating the exact amount you're using? There is one key difference in, between mining, because I do think there are some parallels, but there's one key difference, and that is there's not a huge power consumption aspect of running a Lightning node, whereas with mining, clearly we have that. So in the early days of mining, you had the hobbyist miners. They clearly got priced out of the market. It became much more commoditized. You had these, now you just have these large mining farms getting the cheapest electricity possible. So I think the key difference here is you don't have the electricity element. But at the end of the day, we will have larger liquidity providers that are optimizing channels, that are ensuring that their nodes are well connected, that are using these types of liquidity marketplaces to do so. But I do believe the hobbyists will be able to still participate, because you can commit some of your capital to the network. You'll have the tools available that everyone else will have. And even if you don't have, say, a huge amount of capital on there, you still can have connectivity to a variety of nodes. So I don't think it'll be nearly as bad as what happened in the mining sector, but there will be far more professionalization of people that are operating nodes, that are deploying capital to the network, and that are able to manage and efficiently allocate the capital and liquidity on there. So yeah, fees will go up on Lightning. Oh, right, by the way, I do think we will ultimately see some competition with on-chain fees. If on-chain fees do happen to go down because a lot of funds move off-chain, if Lightning fees go higher, then people are going to go back to on-chain. So of course there's a time delay as well. There's a 10 minutes between that. But one key point, a lot of people like to ask, what about miners? How are miners going to get incentivized if everyone goes onto Lightning? And the answer is, well, you have a lot of these Lightning financial products that use the base chain as an anchor. One example being a Lightning Labs product called Lightning Loop. So it's a submarine swap product. You can loop in. That's going from on-chain BTC to off-chain to Lightning, and you loop out for people that want inbound liquidity. And you go from Lightning back to on-chain. You actually then get inbound liquidity in Lightning. Your channel stays open, and you're able to get the funds off-chain. You could put it in a hardware wallet. You could send it to an exchange, et cetera. So Loop uses on-chain fees. Alex Bosworth has done great talks around Hyperloop and batching of Loop transactions. And I will see a lot more of these financial products emerging that do go on-chain as well and use the base chain. So there will certainly be demand for the anchor of Bitcoin. Of course, if you're opening and closing channels, you're going to the chain as well.
Yeah, I think there seems to be a lot of focus on a lot of user-facing lab. But what you're talking about is a lot more kind of back-end enterprise type products. Do you think over the next year or so there'll be what do you predict in terms of an emergence of different types of products that are aimed at really these large capital providers being able to deploy liquidity into the network?
Yeah, so shout out to Ride the Lightning. The devs are awesome. They really wish they could be here right now. In fact, they tweeted that they're watching the live stream and they will be at the next Lightning conference. So they've done a really cool node UI that, how many people here, anybody using Ride the Lightning? I know Black Demon has deployed it as well. So they've started to build out these tools. What I predict is I think we'll see a lot more of emergence of ways for people to run nodes, to manage liquidity, and to be able to optimize around that. I mean, again, in the early days, we didn't even have liquidity products and tools. Then we emerged, and now they're being built or they're shipped. So I think people are seeing the need for this. So one also key point is, it's been amazing to see the businesses that are Lightning first or Lightning only. Right? A year and a half ago, there was no mainnet Lightning. And now we have companies that are raising like millions of dollars that are Lightning-only companies, which is incredible. And many of them have been here at this conference and speaking. So they're going to grow. Shout out, by the way, to Fold. I know you guys have a really long wait list to get on your app. Lightning Pizza, also. Big fan of that. Please get some vegan pizza. But they're going to need these tools to be able to be these Lightning businesses. Another key point that I've noticed is, we have a lot of legacy companies in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. It's funny to call them legacy because they haven't even been around for that long. But the Lightning companies that have emerged are the new players because they're able to actually be more nimble. They're able to integrate Lightning. Carla in her talk talked about how she was able to take on, when she worked at Luno, the Lightning integration over there. And because they were a smaller exchange and they were kind of growing and emerging, she was able to integrate Lightning. So the legacy players are going to take a little bit longer in our space. And I'm talking Bitcoin legacy, not like the broader financial system, which we'll get to as well. But we have this new crop of companies, another one, Alto. I know we have folks from Alto. They're launching soon, I believe, Lightning to Fiat. You can buy Bitcoin, withdraw on Lightning. We have SparkSwap. We have Zap. There was a week, Breeze, I believe, where all of a sudden, all the Lightning Fiat products just shipped. And everyone was wondering, okay, what was happening over the summer? Bam, September comes, everyone's doing Lightning to Fiat. And I think that's really significant because talking about the usability, being able to go directly to Lightning and being able to, buy with Fiat. I also saw there's a Canadian dollar project. I think we have a talk around euros to Lightning. That is really key in terms of gaining users and getting usability and getting people onto these platforms that are then, going to need all these liquidity and capital allocation services moving forward.
What about looking a little bit farther out? So, Lightning is a marathon. We're early. Marathons are very long. So, when you think about kind of, Lightning Labs, Lightning Network, the ecosystem over the next sort of, 5 years, like what are the kind of big themes that you think will be the big drivers, kind of innovation or the direction things are headed?
Yeah, so we heard a great talk from Will around usability. I know there's been a lot of discussion around that. And getting to the point where it just works. Yost on our team has this great saying, basic payment perfectly executed. That takes time, right? I mean, again, 18 months ago, when we had the L&D beta, we only released it for command line intentionally. We knew, we were like, okay, we're not gonna put a UI in this yet because we knew it was early. We knew it was not gonna work. The Casa node came out in September of last year, and I remember Lalu was scared that, he was like, what if this thing doesn't work? Like, what if we're not ready yet? And it turns out it actually, any Casa node users in the room, like, it works, right? I knew they're actually shipping their Casa node V2 pretty soon. But so, we knew that it was going to be the command line days, right? And it's like, you didn't have the graphical interface, you didn't have the World Wide Web. People were actually using things just via text. A lot of the devs are still on the command line. But I do see usability as one of the major themes, and it's just going to take time. Like, you actually have a great analogy. Do you want to tell people about the analogy you've used? Because I've used it with a lot of folks.
Yeah, I mean, well, I've been kind of following the Lightning Network for a couple years, and one of the things that struck me, and I've noticed a lot of people that have kind of been around for different iterations of the web, kind of call into a lot of parallels. You say, wow, this really feels a lot like the web did back kind of in 2000, where, thinking back then, it was you had a bunch of search engines and kind of the directory. And the big existential question was, well, should the web be a search box or should it be a directory?
And by the way, 2000 was right after the crash as well, so you can analogize to the Bitcoin bear market, which was really good for building.
Yes.
I don't like the bull markets. I want to build.
Yeah, I mean, that's when, Google and Amazon and eBay and a lot of those kind of iconic initial web companies were created. And yeah, there was this big question of like, well, what is the web going to look like? Ultimately, what happened was there were just so many web pages that directory became unworkable, and then you had a bunch of search engines, and they didn't really work well. You'd use like Lycos and Alta Vista, and it just wouldn't.
I used Alta Vista.
Yeah, it wouldn't be exactly what you were looking for, and then Google came along, and they had that PageRank, and it just kind of worked, right? And and then they kind of defined really the search interface was the interface of the web. As you want to go, you type in what you want, you find a page. And I think, Lightning seems to be the sort of way Bitcoin is supposed to work, right? You just, from a user's perspective is I put money in my wallet, I want to pay someone, I put in their thing, I pay them, and it just instantly goes. And, up until very recently, that just wasn't how it actually worked. And so, when I finally saw like, wow, this really works, and then, what you were saying is the complexity behind that is immense, right? Just like the complexity around indexing and crawling the entire internet was immense, but then you simplify it into this very, very simple user interface. And a lot of times, like those, that's sort of the spark that really takes to kind of drive, mass market adoption. And, I think to your point, it's just very early, but the underpinnings are all there. A lot of the problems are sort of enumerated, and now it's just, really kind of tackling those last issues.
Right. People, it's funny because people didn't say like, oh, the World Wide Web will never work and Google will never work. It turns out, underlying that single search box is a lot of, technical, complexity, obviously PageRank, all the work that, the founders of Google did, like in their PhD before they even started the company. So there was a lot that went into that. And similarly, we will undoubtedly get to the point where, liquidity is automated. Like I'm really excited about the future of automation here. We also like to joke with Alex Bosworth that he can write like a book on Lightning liquidity because there's so much to discuss there, and we'll hear more about that in his talk tomorrow morning. But we'll get to the point where we will see things like automation, right? We'll see, automatic rebalancing, and we'll see a lot of the things that happen in the background that are going to be completely abstracted from the end user. An example I often use is, email, right? SMTP is a protocol that the vast majority of email users don't know about. Like we, as largely a developer community, do know about that. But no, like people that are just using Gmail on their phone, do not know about the complexity behind that, and it just works. Similarly, I do believe we will get to a point with Lightning where it's going to just work. Building out all that infrastructure is really fun. I find it really interesting, and I'm excited for the next few years. But we're going to get there.
Yeah, another parallel that comes up often when you kind of look at the history of different technology platforms is there seems to be usually two that emerge. The sort of open source version of something, and then a more closed kind of corporate version of it. You can think of like Windows and Linux and iOS and Android. And I think when you look at for example, something like Libra, I think Libra sort of could represent a class of sort of closed payment network systems. So do you see a lot of potential parallels between those things, Lightning Network being the sort of open version versus these like corporate payment networks that are emerging?
Yeah, so when I was a grad student, I was studying the intersection of law and technology, and we looked at the history of the closed systems and the open ones that emerged. So for example, when I first got on the internet, I was on AOL in the US, right? And there was Prodigy, CompuServe, and a variety of these kind of walled garden closed systems. But at the end of the day, the emergence of the World Wide Web, does anybody remember like AOL keywords? So it was a proprietary naming system within America Online where, they controlled
Original
everything.
hashtag.
Yeah, right? and instead of domain names. And what was so key about the emergence of the web and why ultimately the web won and took over was, it seems obvious, but like anybody could build on top of it. It was not controlled by, AOL, Prodigy, CompuServe, et cetera. And even those services actually integrated web browsers and just became effectively ISPs for people to access the web. And now I guess AOL still has like media and some email service. But the importance and the global access for anybody to build on top of the web was so key. So when I first heard about Libra, it's funny because there were various attempts. So I've heard a lot of people say, like, we really wanted Libra to be built on Bitcoin, but my take was that's never going to happen because a company like Facebook likes to control things, right? And there's an association, and there are a variety of people that are participating, but frankly, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be about getting data from users, controlling a degree of financial access, and owning that, and potentially monetizing that. So it turns out when you want to exert control, or when you're Facebook is a uniting cause in the US across like all political parties because everyone hates them. And so it turns out it's pretty difficult to be a corporation and launch, an attempt at, as my friend Meltem Demir said in Congress, she said, Libra's not a cryptocurrency, call it whatever you want, a digital currency, eCash. I think it's kind of like eCoin for the Mr. Robot fans out there, right? With, you've got the evil corporation that's controlling everything. By the way, one of my favorite scenes in Mr. Robot is when you actually have Bitcoin versus eCoin, and the guy, Philip something or other behind eCoin, goes to the federal government of the United States telling them that Bitcoin is taking off, and you have all these miners in China, and the blocks are already full. Like, they even talked about transaction volume and how this is a big threat. And, well, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but check out that scene. It's really great in Mr. Robot. So it turned out, if you're a corporation and you're going to launch a currency like this, regulators are going to care. And this is the kind of thing where you think, okay, we understand why Satoshi is still anonymous, and by the way, should still stay anonymous until he, she, or they ever want to not be anonymous. There's a huge amount of regulatory heat and pressure that comes along with that. So one thing that I was really surprised, how many people here saw Meltem's awesome testimony in Congress around this stuff? Shitcoin is now officially in the Congressional Register in the United States. Yeah, right? Because somebody in Congress, people that really knew what was up, did ask her what a shitcoin is. But the key difference is, and one thing that I was even kind of pleasantly surprised about was, people were able to distinguish, within the US government, the difference between Bitcoin, which is an open network, which is decentralized, which anybody can build upon, and a coin that is coming from a company like Facebook. And now, maybe, we were debating earlier, Jim and I, is Libra going to launch? I think, and from what I've heard from folks that are in the know, there's a fairly low probability that it will launch at all. If it does launch, I believe it'll be very watered down. It's not going to be, what they're claiming it's going to be. The regulatory heat, the kind of KYC, all the checks that they'll have to put in because it is a controlled system is going to be very different from Bitcoin and Lightning, and that's part of why we're going to win. But Jim, I know you think it'll launch.
Well, I think it will eventually launch. I think it'll probably won't launch in the U.S. or Europe at the beginning. But I think when you think about how existential this probably is for Facebook, I think obviously everyone in this room kind of believes in a future where digital currencies are the norm. I think Facebook understands that. I think it's really even fascinating is literally in the last couple months, I'm starting to see central banks around the world start talking about issuing stable coins. I think back in August, one of the kind of central bankers in London, basically said that the world needs a sort of global decentralized currency. I'm sure he wasn't talking about Bitcoin. He's talking about something that's going to be issued by governments. And so, I think it's really interesting that, this is all happening. So I do think companies will start to issue their own money. And yeah, when you kind of look at those parallels of it's almost like the intranet versus the internet. When you think of Lightning being sort of open, borderless, anyone can work on it, versus something where you're ultimately going to need permission to build on it.
Right, and there's a reason why the internet won out in that battle. But I was actually at an event with quite a lot of people from the financial world recently, and somebody from one of the major banks said, they're building a system on top of their banking system, and they said, oh yeah, it's like the Lightning, the layer 2 for our banking digital system. And I thought, oh wow, that's, now we're the reference point. Like, hey, the people in the financial world are talking about Lightning. That's pretty cool. But there was also a lot of talk around this concept of central bank issued digital currencies. It gets really interesting because, okay, how do you control that then? Do you have to hold your funds in a bank? Can you hold private keys directly? Can you actually have that in a wallet? I think there are a lot of problems that have not yet been worked out for that really to work. I know the Chinese government has said they want to issue the digital yuan. Meanwhile, we've got Bitcoin, right? It's global, it's interoperable, anybody can use it around the world. By the way, shout out to the Lightning Torch. How many people in the room held the Lightning Torch? Awesome. Yeah, that was amazing. And I was sitting in the room with these people in finance, and I was explaining the Lightning Torch to them, and I said, there was this internet space cat who liked tacos who decided to send people Satoshis, and they basically thought I was insane. But there's some really substantial power to what has happened in this community and how things evolved. And at the end of the day, I think it was like 60 or more countries that the torch actually went to. And, the transactions were instant or near instant. The fees were quite low. Some people were saying, oh, they paid a couple cents. But think about in the financial system today. If you had tried to have the Lightning Torch, like via, the international wire system, you would have paid more fees in the wire than the torch amount itself. It would have taken like several days, if not a week, to arrive. A lot of the transactions would have been blocked because they were going to different places around the world. And so, we're really building something that is global and where you do have it accessible. And it's funny because people were saying, on the Libra front, oh, Libra could really change everything in terms of the ability to finally transact. But we can do that, and we are doing that with Bitcoin and Lightning. And I like that we're kind of the underdog. Like you look at Libra and what's going on in the congressional hearings, and Bitcoin's kind of this other thing. I think that's good for us. Like, it's better that people don't think we're going to do this. I know I'm saying this on a live stream and publicly, but it's better that they doubt us and they think, oh yeah, this will never really be a thing, and then it actually does become a huge thing because it will. But
yeah, how much do you think, it definitely felt like sort of Libra brought forward, Bitcoin, digital currencies, this whole thing, like right to the fore. How do you think sort of the more public perception of Bitcoin generally has changed kind of over the last couple months as all this has been playing out?
It's been really interesting. So around the time, we've heard in a few talks around the 2017, boom, things were crazy. Like, I remember, things are always crazy in the Bitcoin world, but it's kind of like, how many people here got a message from a friend, family member, or somebody around that time, like, hey, how do I buy Bitcoin? How do I invest? Like, your random cousin you haven't heard from, your, friend from high school or something. So that was a crazy time back then, and you saw, the ICO craze, right? And there were projects that have raised like $250 million, by the way, some of whom have not shipped yet. And we were trying to be a counterpoint as both Lightning Labs and in the Lightning community of like actually shipping working code with a real product that works, with real Bitcoin that people can use. So we saw a lot of this hype and a lot of this craziness. As I said, I'm a fan of bear markets. I actually think, of course I believe in the long-term value of Bitcoin. I believe eventually, Bitcoin is going to increase in value, but in terms of the day-to-day, a lot of this price distraction cannot necessarily be good for people that are building. So at the end of the day, I think in terms of the future of what we're building here, there's so much potential. It's going to be like a long-term marathon. It's not going to happen overnight, but the usability, the ability for people to really build, it's been incredible to see. Like, I don't think people realize 2-3 years ago, a Lightning meetup might have been 5 or 10 people, right? And now we've got 500 in this room, a bunch of people watching on the live stream, and I can't wait to see what everyone builds.
Nice. Well, thank you. I think we have some.
We have some time for questions,
Yeah,
right?
some time for questions. If anyone wants to ask, the microphone's back there.
What are your thoughts on someone who's really good at coding and has a couple hours a day? What's the best place to start contributing?
Awesome question. So one thing that I love about being around Lightning and being involved in this community is people are so passionate. For L&D, we've got the L&D Slack. I want to have a shout out to all the great people in our Slack community, but especially one, her name is Molly, and she is like testing Lightning every day and submitting GitHub issues, etc. So I think it ultimately depends. Do you want to pitch in on the protocol side? Do you want to check out the Bolt spec? I was chatting with somebody yesterday who made his first PR on the Bolt spec, just like fixing some typos, and Connor approved it. Do you want to be contributing to L&D, to C Lightning, to Eclair, to all the implementations, or do you want to be building a Lightning app? So ultimately, it depends on what your interest level is. Do you want to go on the protocol side? Do you want to go on the application side? But one of the things about Lightning that I'm personally really excited about is, the ability, as we've seen throughout today, to build on top of Lightning. Like building on the base chain of Bitcoin using, script is just not that easy. And of course, you have the confirmation times and all the other reasons why we're building on Lightning. I've talked to quite a few people, many of whom are here today, who actually told me, I thought this is interesting, Lightning is what got them interested in Bitcoin, not the other way around, because they saw, the ability to build these applications, and they started to learn about Bitcoin, and then they went down the rabbit hole. So at the end of the day, I think it'll depend upon, a lot of folks that are building apps have done it. We saw with the Boltathon talk, you can do it in a couple of hours a day for sure. But if you want to submit PRs to the implementations, there are certainly things you can, address with that time as well. But yeah, I love the contributors in our ecosystem have been incredible, and it's been so cool, by the way, to meet people in real life that on the internet. And I've had in the last 24 hours, I've met dozens of those folks. So thank you to all the contributors. I think, do we have time for 1 or 2 more questions?
A couple more.
Hi, I actually just wanted to ask, so I've got my ideas for what I would like to see 50 to 100 years from now, so the long-term future. I'd like to know what your thoughts are just in general on that really long-term, not just the next 10, 15 years, but looking much further.
You want 50 to 100?
50 to 100 years.
Well, we're all going to live forever in this audience, right? So
I've got kids,
solved
they'll be
anti-aging. The idea of value transfer right now is still, quite clunky, right? If I want to go buy a plane ticket and I'm on, not Travel by Bit because they accept Bitcoin and Lightning for smaller value payments, I've got to take out my credit card and it's super clunky. I believe in the future, the idea of value transfer generally will just be completely seamless. You'll probably have devices where you'll just transact between individuals. There's of course this idea of the self-driving car, pays to go charge with electricity, and then you could actually have a market on highways where if people want to go faster, you could actually have speed markets with cars paying each other, Internet of Things type things. But for me, the idea that right now, to be able to have value and transact, like there's so much friction, and there's so many intermediaries, by the way, like the credit card processors, who are taking, 3%, but if it's a small value transaction, it could be upwards of like 33 or higher. I believe all those intermediaries are going to go away, right? You've seen this with technological evolution. Intermediaries that are not really operating in a means of value, like they're going to get disintermediated. So I think similarly, you'll have this degree of seamless ability to transfer value between people, between machines. We'll have like, who knows what'll be going on with AI at that point. Like AIs they'll probably like have their own value and then transact with each other. But I think the clunkiness is going to be a big part of it. That's going to go.
All right, I think we have time for one more. Yeah.
That corner has a lot of questions.
Okay, thanks. Email is broken due to spam. Do you have any plans to unbreak email or the whole internet by making emails expensive for a few satoshis, which would mean unsolicited payments without invoices, and linking emails to that?
So I believe we have Adam back at this event. Thank you, Adam, for coming up with Hashcash. I think it's really cool, actually, that he worked on this anti-spam technology that ultimately Satoshi adopted and got into the Bitcoin white paper. So actually, Jesse Powell, CEO of Kraken, integrated back in the day. This was like 4 more years ago. If you wanted to send Jesse an email, you actually had to send him Bitcoin. And fun fact, I remember I was emailing Jesse. I sent the Bitcoin. I actually had a 0-fee transaction, which is like not possible these days. Might as well accept that. Back then, that was still, people would accept it. And then he sent it back, which was very nice of him. It was a trusted system. And I got the Bitcoin back, and we emailed. So this is the kind of Lightning app that I do believe we'll see emerge. Spam filters have gotten better, but it depends. Like if you want to use a centralized service like Gmail, it's much better than if you're operating your own mail server. But to me, this is a great example. Is anybody working on a lab for this? I've definitely seen it suggested. So this is exactly the kind of thing I think we'll see emerge from the community. Can we take like one more?
Yeah.
Quick, I know Jeff is. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the inspiring speech, Sergey from Sabo. Could you please shortly explain your roadmap for the next 1 or 2 years? How are you going to develop the project? Because it's really interesting. You said that 11 years ago, the state of the project it was really different than now. And what are you going to do to make it really adoptable in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, so some people like to say like, oh, Lightning's not ready, things are moving so slowly, but actually things are moving really quickly. Like the speed at which Lightning development has progressed in the last year and a half is like mind-blowing to me. And like if you had told me we would be where we are today, I don't think I would have believed it with all these 500 people in the room. So thank you to the community, and thank you to all the people involved for like being a part of this, building this, pitching in. So in terms of Lightning Labs, one of the things that we're really passionate about is building non-custodial financial products. I talked about anchoring to the chain. I went to law school, as mentioned, and I was like, I don't want to be a custodian, right? And the power of Bitcoin is you don't have to be, and I know we've heard from Lop and quite a few others around this. We'll hear more about this tomorrow. But when I was talking to these people at this financial event recently, I actually said to them, never before was it possible to build non-custodial financial products. You just couldn't do that. Like you couldn't have, a series of contracts where somebody was, where you had physical cash, but then you gave it to somebody else. No, there was always going to be counterparty risk and debt. Now we don't have to have that. So I was trying to explain to these folks the significance of what this means. I believe we'll see an entirely new class of products emerge. As I said, Lightning being this financial infrastructure, building out these financial markets, like, talking about Jack's talk around derivatives, I actually think we'll see financial assets, things like Lightning liquidity become financial assets, and people will be trading around things like liquidity. I really love the idea of Bitcoin fees, hedging against that. So in terms of what I see moving forward, of course there's a user side facing thing. You have all the businesses that have built on top of this. They're getting the users on board, but you also have the evolution of the financial aspect of Lightning and all these non-custodial products where people can actually, deploy funds onto Lightning, commit capital, make money off of their money, and do so without having to trust a counterparty. And to me, that's really powerful. And that self-sovereignty aspect is part of why we're here. And I think there's so much potential moving forward in terms of building out, putting the hands in the users and everyone to hold their own money and hold their own custody. And I can't wait to see what everyone builds out around that.
Great, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.